Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek 2024, the Summer of Trek. This is a BookTube event created by Vin at Revenant Reads, and he assembled a valiant bridge crew of other booktubers to talk about Star Trek all summer long. Read Star Trek, read about Star Trek, read popular science of the type that Star Trek helped to forward all summer long. Uh, I've been doing a lot of that. I haven't made as many videos as I would like. I will try to amend that if I'm invited back to co-host next year. But I have been reading a lot of Star Trek, even when I haven't been making videos. New and old, not new in the sense of new Trek, but new to me. Older books from the real era of Star Trek that I hadn't read yet. Um, but today is the last day of Book Trek. Today is the last day of August. Unbelievably, we are here in the United States. We're heading into the long weekend, Labor Day weekend, which traditionally marks the end of summer. I know it's a typical thing for people to say, but it really does feel like it lasted a minute, except for the month of July, which was hot in Boston and took a little bit of getting used to. It took a little bit of acclimating. So we're done with Book Trek for another year. And Book Trek is a lot for me like June on the Range, where I probably won't read any Star Trek fiction between now and next Book Trek, unless it's a new book, unless it's a new novel, and those are a dodgy prospect. I might do that, I might not. But to finish up Book Trek, since none of you minded this year when I did rereading, I thought this time I would do yet another video on my favorite Star Trek novel. It's not very unpredictable to the rest of you. This is from 1977. This is The Price of the Phoenix by Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreth. 1977, there were almost no Star Trek books, but there was a lot of Star Trek fiction, a huge amount of it out there that was passed around. There were Star Trek fan clubs. Some of them got to be a fairly cash and carry type official thing, where people would type up Star Trek fiction, serialized Star Trek fiction, not just short stories, but serialized stuff, and do it, copy it over, make copies on dot matrix printers and whatnot, or old copy machines with blotches of ink on them, and you would send a self-addressed stamped envelope, and you would get the latest installment. It's that style. That happened in Star Trek fiction for a long time, and it happened at a huge amount of fervor. It will seem primitive. It will seem stone knives and bearskins to those of you who were born in the internet era, where sharing such stuff is easy and happens literally at the speed of light. But back in the ye old postal days, we did it anyway. It was just a lot more care and painstaking was put into it. And there were some major, massive serialized stories that obviously cannot ever be printed now. I mean, I'm sure that the owners of those stories, if they're still alive, have them, have all the subsequent chapters. Probably, in a lot of cases, it was the greatest creative endeavor of their lives, was to write this long story about, for T negative or whatever, about the war of the wars in the early barbaric days of Vulcan, or the history of the Gorn, or something like that. Those stories existed, and they were huge. They went on for episode after episode after episode, largely written by their one proprietor, but also fueled by feedback from fans who would get their self-addressed stamped envelope back in the mail with their latest chapter, and then dash off a letter once they'd read it. It was the analog equivalent of the internet with a comments field and whatnot. Those writers obviously can't print any of that stuff now. They can't do it. I mean, Star Trek fiction only blossomed after those early days that I remember quite well. I loved some of those stories and wish that I still had them. Star Trek fiction only blossomed, and also, unbeknownst to any of us in 1977, Star Trek also blossomed into a multi-billion-dollar franchise with a horde of lawyers. So if you wrote one of those long serialized stories for some dot matrix journal, a Star Trek journal, you can't print it now. You can't self-publish it now. It's copyrighted material. So those things are gone forever. I would imagine they're gone forever, and maybe not forever, but certainly until Star Trek falls into the common domain, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. And those early stories They could be full of fun. Keep in mind that the parameters of what Star Trek was and weren't as well known then. So they could be full of invention as well, stuff that isn't canon, that couldn't possibly be canon, but that fans wanted to speculate on. And they were also full of another element that was, I expected the speculation. I expected the extrapolation. I expected people wanting to continue to live in what Sonder Marshak and Myrna Culbreath themselves referred to as a sunlit universe. What I didn't expect was the sadomasochism. that came to me out of the blue. And that infused early Star Trek fiction. That samizdat unofficial Star Trek fiction. Sadomasochism infused it. Whippings, beatings, punchings, torturings, and also a lot of either subliminal or outright homoerotic interest between Kirk and Spock. I didn't see that coming, and to this day, 50 years of thinking about that, I still don't know where it came from. I want to say that it was a delayed reaction to the Vietnam War and to the warped ideas of fatherhood and also the rise of the feminist movement, but it's all murky. I would, if I could analyze it, if I could interview a million people, probably some of those elements would prove out, but I don't know how, and I don't know how they'd be connected. I don't know what explains it, but it filled early Star Trek fiction. And, well, given that, you could almost expect that it would migrate into Star Trek books that were actually authorized by Bantam. You could expect that maybe some of it would make its way in. And it did. Perhaps nowhere more so than in The Price of the Phoenix and its sequel, The Fate of the Phoenix. Which probably makes sense since Sonder Marshak and Myrna Culbreath were probably what we would call today super fans. It makes sense that they did more than anyone to shepherd a lot of fan fiction into the shape that it needed to be printed, and they actually printed it in Star Trek The New Voyages 1 and 2. They doctored a lot of it, shaped a lot of it, cared about a lot of it, loved it, knew it really well. That was once upon a time before New Trek. How well you knew your Star Trek canon was a big deal. That was a measuring rod for how seriously fans should take your fiction. Sonder Marshak and Myrna Culbreath actually put footnotes in some of their Star Trek novels in order to show that they had their chapter and verse down pat at a time when, keep in mind, that was no small feat. There were no video cassettes that people could watch. In 1977, the reruns were going, but you still had to take notes. They wrote this book in the full flower of that fan tradition, which was not only loving and very passionate and pulled in all sorts of fan favorites from the show, but also had a strong streak of sadomasochism. I don't know where it comes from, but you have to be prepared for it when you're reading especially this book. This is the story of a renegade scientist and planet owner named Omni, O-M-N-E, who has set up a weird enclave planet full of, think Disneyland, only on a planet scale. It's full of cultural enclaves. So the arenas of ancient Rome, or the courts of Versailles, or the Old West, the American Old West. There are whole living dioramas set up there just for Omni's amusement. And he also has a fortress underground in this planet, and he has also shielded the planet. There are force fields around the planet that are impenetrable, even to Federation technology and Starfleet weapons. I guess. I don't think that anyone's ever fired a phaser at these shields, but it seems that they would hold. Mr. Scott can't penetrate them in this book, which is a lot, considering that he is a miracle worker. The Kirk and Spock, the Enterprise goes to investigate, and Kirk and Spock want to talk to this guy. They want to talk to Omni and find out what his intentions are, what he plans on doing, all that sort of stuff. When they're there, they find out that there are other delegates, one of whom is the Romulan commander, an incredibly popular figure in that old samizdat Star Trek fiction world. Incredibly popular figure from the third season episode, The Enterprise Incident, which if you don't you're not familiar with the original series, there's not a lot that's good in the third season. Dagger of the Mind is good, or Day of the Dove is good. The Enterprise Incident is good. There are some episodes in the third season that you could bear to watch, and the Enterprise Incident was a revelation in a lot of ways. It could have been really, really dumb. It was saved from dumbness to the extent that it was by its writer, Dorothy Fontana, who introduces us to a character of a Romulan commander. She is female. She is a female Romulan commander, and she outranks Kirk. She's not in Starfleet service, but she outranks him anyway because she is a group commander. She commands a group of starships, not just one. If Kirk had that in Starfleet, he would be probably a Commodore. She has more responsibility than he does. She has risen higher in her own military ranks than he has. She's played by Joanne Linville and does a great job as the Romulan commander. We never learn her name. Spock learns her name, but he doesn't say it out loud. And fans loved her. Absolutely loved her. I loved her too. I think she's a great character, even in that one episode. She has appeared in Star Trek fiction to an enormous extent after that, because fans wanted to do all sorts of things with her. They wanted to devise her fate, figure out what happens to her, give her a whole backstory. There was an enormous on-running thing. I think it went to 80 chapters or so of fan fiction, just telling her story up to the moment when she meets the Enterprise. Dorothy Fontana's original script for the Enterprise Incident was considerably more adult and dignified than what it was made into in the episode that you would actually watch on camera, where the Romulan commander falls head over heels in love with Mr. Spock like a schoolgirl and is rather easily outwitted. She becomes rather a foolish figure towards the end of the episode. And there's also a moment that a couple of people involved with the show argued against, and fans railed against it. Which is Kirk easily defeating a Romulan when we're told that they're Vulcans. They're basically Vulcans. And we know for a fact that Kirk cannot easily defeat a Vulcan but, because he tries a couple of times to defeat his first officer and can't even come close. But in the Enterprise Incident, he's facing off against a Romulan, a militarily trained Romulan, at grappling quarters with that Romulan completely ready for him, and easily defeats him. Just it's simple, it's casual, which is a little ridiculous. Also, this introduces the Romulan cloaking device, reintroduces the cloaking device, and Kirk steals it, and Scotty implements it into the Enterprise, which would certainly take a refit of the whole ship. Scotty, even a miracle worker, could not do that on the fly in half an hour. But even so, even given the silly bits, the Enterprise Incident is still a really good episode. And Joanne Linville nails the part of the Romulan commander. And when Kirk and Spock beam down to Omni's planet, they realize the Romulan commander is there as well. Also in negotiations with Omni, also wondering what he is and what kind of a threat he presents to the settled order of the galaxy, which at the moment in Star Trek is the Federation, the Romulan Star Empire, and the Klingon Empire. Pretty disappointing. When I read this book, I loved it right away. I loved it in 77. I loved it. But I was disappointed that there were no Klingon characters in here. I was really hoping. Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreath have a real affinity for Kang, the Klingon commander in Day of the Dove. They actually have him in one of their short stories, and it would have been great if he had been a character here, but it would have complicated the book. I would have loved to see that. But while they're all touring all of these different enclaves, all these different cultural enclaves, one of them is an old Indian subcontinent of India, an old Indian enclave where the wife kills herself on the funeral pyre of her husband, where that's the culture. And Kirk watches as he sees that this is about to happen with a wife and a child, and rushes into the burning building to save her, and it collapses on him and kills him. They pull his charred, dead body out of the remains of the building. So Spock has to go back to the Enterprise with Kirk's dead body And he does, and he is in his own way devastated. McCoy has to examine the body. He and Spock have a conversation, an unthinkable conversation. Is it a double? Is it an android? Is there anything? Is this a changeling? Is it all these things that we've encountered in the past? And McCoy says, no. No, it's him. This is stunning. This is a stunning way to start the book. We don't get the negotiations between Kirk and Spock and Omni and the Romulan commander, who is never named in this book. She's just called the commander. We don't get any of that. That's all told in flashback. What we get, we start the book with Kirk dead. But it turns out that Omni has several other cards to play. He's far more dangerous and far more malevolent and complex than even he seemed on the surface. He's also formidable. He's huge and seems to be a Vulcan offshoot. His own race seems to be a Vulcan offshoot as well. So he's not just big. He's Vulcan strong. Which Sandor Marshak and Myrna Culbreath make a great deal out of Vulcanoid strength. It means a lot to them. They record to it over and over again in this book that Spock is much stronger than a human being, that the Romulan commander is much stronger than a human being, and that Omni may be stronger than either one of them. He reveals his ultimate wild card. He has developed a device, the Phoenix process, that combines Star Trek replicators with Star Trek transporters in order to create a perfect duplicate of a human being. No trace that they aren't the same person. A perfect duplicate. And he's done that for Kirk. And basically tells Spock, well, I made him. He is a perfect duplicate of your dead captain, but I made him. He's my property. And I will give him to you in exchange for certain favors. I want something from you. I am offering you what means more to you than anything in the world. I expect to be compensated. This is explosive, and it gets even more explosive once it's later revealed, not that much later in the book. I don't want to spoil too much of this, but it's a 50-year-old Star Trek novel that is certainly not canon, so I don't know how much I can. But it is later revealed, not that much later in the book, the thing you obviously know is true, which is that the original Kirk also is alive. It's obviously you can't kill Captain Kirk. The body in the burned house was another of these unofficial duplicates. Who knows if that duplicate ever had a moment of awareness? Who knows if that duplicate ever lived? A short-lived and unnamed side character. So, in the book, you end up with the Romulan commander, Spock, Omni, Kirk, and an exact duplicate of Kirk, who, for convenience sake, everyone starts to call James. And a twisted psychological melodrama evolves from that setting. Omni wants to break the spirit of his James, of his creation. He wants to break the spirit of Captain Kirk, both the original and the duplicate James. And in order to break their spirit, it's somehow important for him to break the spirit of a starship captain. No explanation is given as to why, except that he has to be the alpha male. He doesn't want to just break Kirk's spirit. He wants to break his body. He wants to make him cry and beg for mercy. Not for your ship, not for your Federation, but for yourself. I want to break you physically. In the 1970s, when I was reading this over and over again, I was only thinking that was weird. Of course, now in the 21st century, I recognize the rape echoes. I recognize all the stuff that you couldn't. I don't think you could print this today. This has had a few reprints. It's had a few different covers. I don't think you could reprint it today unless no one involved in the reprinting at Bantam or whatever giant conglomerate Bantam has been sucked into, unless no one involved in the reprinting actually read the book. If they did, I don't know. Well, either nobody involved in the reprint nobody involved with a reprint could have read the book, or they would be assuming that no one would read it once it was reprinted. That certainly the blue-haired scolds on Twitter would not read it and object to it and try to have everybody involved in the reprinting of the novel canceled and then executed. One way or another, you would have to be relying on ignorance. If you knew what was in this book and what was in its twice as long sequel, you couldn't reprinted. This is basically that dot matrix old Star Trek fiction full of sadomasochism. It's also full of great stuff, just like that old fiction was. There's great stuff here. It's for me a terrific page turner. I recognize all of its flaws, but I love it anyway. And one of the best elements of the book has nothing to do with the Phoenix process. Although Omni is right, and Kirk and Spock and McCoy are right when they speculate about how much damage this could do to the galaxy. All you would need to do is be in the right place at the right time and offer someone the one thing for which they would do anything. But as all of that plot is unfolding, you are expecting all along. Chandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreath are building all along an expectation that no matter what else happens, no matter how else this plot gets resolved, at the climax of the book, Spock and Omni must fight physically, and they do, and it's visceral and very satisfying. Spock is completely out of character. Towards the end of it, he's completely out of character, and when their fight is over, you think the book is over, but it's not. It's not. There is an amazing, I won't even call it the fifth act. It's one step beyond the fifth act. There's an amazing final scene that is just terrific. This is not. It pains me, but I'm willing to admit this is not good Star Trek fiction. This is not good science fiction, except in the way that Chandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreath play around with ideas. That is the quintessential activity of science fiction as a genre, is to play around with ideas. And they do that in this book and the sequel, and they obviously are having a ball doing it. So, that sense, yes. But otherwise, I know, this is just my favorite. That's all. So that is how I want to wrap up Book Trek 2024, is with my favorite book, a total reread. I've mentioned it a million times on this channel. And I also want to thank Vin and all my co-hosts. I want to thank all of you for all the thoughts you've given me about the Star Trek that we've been talking about this summer. As always, Book Trek is enormous amounts of fun. So long may it rain. I'm gonna wrap this up for the summer, but I will see you next year. Thank you, BookTube.